Hi everyone, welcome to today's podcast. Today we'll be looking at the weird and unusual and of course female history of Canada. Today's topic is a little spicy. Today we are going to be delving into the history of the vibrator. I would consider it a fairly common object, but it has a deep and complex history which speaks a lot to the progression of Western morality, so let's get into it. The electromechanical vibrator, as it was deemed, was developed in 1880 by Dr. Joseph Mortimer as a treatment for female hysteria. Female hysteria, diagnosed by the presence of symptoms including anxiety, irritability, chronic arousal, and sleeplessness, was essentially female sexual arousal. To elaborate, during the 19th and 20th century, views of sex revolved around an androcentric model. The androcentric model of sex saw penetration and male orgasm as essential steps to legitimate sex. They had no concept of how female sexuality worked, and even if they did, they didn't really care, since a woman's orgasm wasn't considered necessary to sex. So women were often left less than satisfied. Treatment for hysteria was strictly prescribed vulva massage. Since massage treatment for hysteria didn't involve penetration, it was thought that it could not be sexually gratifying and thus wasn't unchaste. Women were seeking this medical treatment regularly and repeatedly. This resulted in a lucrative yet laborious task which consumed doctors' time and did require a certain level of skill and concentration. Cue the creation of the vibrator. Suddenly, doctors could treat patients in half the time with almost no effort. The market boomed, and within 15 years, 15 manufacturers were producing vibrators after its creation. Even in Canada, a 1909 publication of the Globe lists vibrators amongst the list of new Canadian patents. Everything was going smoothly for the vibrator. Home sales were through the roof, with advertisements claiming health benefits such as youthfulness and health. Then everything came to a halt in 1920, when vibrators started popping up in pornography. Since the clinical cover had been removed, the vibrator was then considered obscene by law and largely disappeared or went underground. But this was not the end of the vibrator's history, or else this would be a very short podcast. It was reborn in the 1960s amidst the sexual revolution. Liberalism was high in Canada, and Canadian law reflected this. In the 1960s, the law placed the burden of indecency on the Canadian community as a whole, allowing society to become the judge of sexual morality. The opinion of the community during this era was distinctly progressive. A Globe and Mail article printed in 1959 bluntly outlines the changing attitudes Canadians held towards sex, stating that we can see this trend in almost every aspect of present-day society, from bikinis to Kinsey. Birth control was legalized, and women were marching out to the workforce. Suddenly, a generation of ladies could prevent unwanted pregnancy and support themselves on their own income. This resulted in sex becoming a hot topic. Even a minister of the United Church in Kingston openly acknowledged the sexual revolution occurring in Canada. He stated that sex was not just a means of procreation, but a means of creating deep and permanent companionship between couples. Rather than regarding the body as inherently evil or dirty, some religious groups started to defend sex by re-examining the words of St. Paul to support the act rather than demonize it. The distribution of sexual material by the early 1970s included audio tapes, seminars, lectures, videotapes, and even workshops. The appearance of sex manuals as bestsellers mirrors this new attitude about intercourse. These manuals, such as Alex Comfort's The Joy of Sex, didn't assume a marriage relationship, instead focusing on liberating men and women's minds and bodies. Interestingly, this book has been reprinted recently for a modern audience, so if you want to get a taste of history with slightly updated graphics, I would suggest picking it up. The most important part about Comfort's book is that vibrators are mentioned and suggested for a variety of sexual acts. The vibrator had re-emerged, but not as a medical tool, instead as a sexual aid which was openly marketed as such. However, this also did not last. Everything changed in the 1980s. The HIV and AIDS crisis in America is one possible reason for the backlash against sex toys in the wake of the sexual revolution. Abstinence and safe sex was highly promoted in order to stop the spread of the infection, which was still widely unknown and spreading quickly. Canadian sex shops were raided, and the owners were sent to trial under obscenity charges. Canadian definitions of obscenity at this point in history were confusing at best. One particular article noted that vibrators shaped like penises were considered obscene, while smooth, non-phallic style vibrators were not. Although there has been progress, vibrators once again being legalized, they remain unsteady in their legality. As we come to the end of this video, I want to emphasize how such a seemingly insignificant object can act as the foundation for an examination of Western society's discourse on sex. I want to thank you for listening, and I'll leave a list of my sources in the description below in case you want to check it out. Thank you.